Before we begin, how are you feeling today? I hope you're okay and taking care of yourself. If today was a bad day, I'm glad you're here. Take a deep breath. This moment is yours. Ready? Let's begin. There's something uniquely haunting about the people we once loved. The ones who saw us up close, held the softest parts of us, and then fractured them without warning. These stories aren't about monsters hiding in closets or shadows lurking under beds. They're about the very real ghosts we invite in when we give someone the keys to our hearts, only to find out they never intended to return them. Love, when twisted, doesn't need sharp teeth or glowing eyes to terrify. It just needs silence where there used to be laughter, a familiar voice in an unfamiliar place, a memory that won't stay buried. Every story you're about to hear began with connection, with longing, attention, intimacy, and each one unraveled into something darker. These aren't tales meant to demonize the ex-lovers in them. They are not warnings about others, but reflections of how easily we excuse the unease in our own chests. How we call jealousy, passion, and control protection. How we stay when the leaving would hurt a little more in the short term, but save us years of looking over our shoulder. If you've ever felt watched by a love you ended, or carried bruises that don't show up on skin, these stories may speak to you in ways you didn't expect. You're not broken for having loved wrong. You're not weak for still remembering. And you're not alone in the echoes that linger. Let these 8 stories remind you that sometimes the scariest things don't come from the outside, but from the people we once let in. And so, let's begin. Not with screams or splashes of red, but with silence. The kind that hums in places you once called safe. The kind that knows your name better than any stranger could. This first story begins in the city of Seattle, in a park where the air still remembers what you tried to forget. Story: Silent Figures of Gas Works. It's strange how a place can hold on to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like someone's still breathing beside you, long after they've gone. Gas Works. Park used to be my sanctuary, a place I could walk off anxiety with views of Lake Union and the city skyline. But now, I avoid it like a wound I refuse to reopen. The first time I met Nathan was at a bookstore on Pine Street. He asked me what I thought of a poetry collection I hadn't even picked up, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so deliberate. That's who Nathan was. Every word, every glance felt engineered, and I mistook that control for charisma. We dated for a year. The first 6 months were filled with soft music, late-night bike rides, and long conversations at Volunteer Park. He remembered every detail I ever shared. My childhood fear of dark stairwells, my dream of one day restoring old furniture, even how I took my coffee. I thought it meant he cared, but with time, I realized it was just ammunition. If I didn't text back within 10 minutes, he'd bring up my fear of abandonment. If I canceled dinner to stay late at work, he'd accuse me of creating emotional distance on purpose. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than any scream. I left him one Sunday morning after he showed up uninvited at my office. Just sat there in the lobby, watching me for hours. No confrontation. Just those silent, unwavering eyes. I moved into a sublet in Capitol Hill, blocked him on everything, changed my routines. I thought I'd done enough to disappear. Then the sightings began. It started with flickers. A tall figure standing near the rusted towers of gasworks as I drove by. I dismissed it. Seattle's full of tall men in coats, but it kept happening. Every other week, I'd walk past the park's edge and see someone who looked like him, just standing, never moving, always watching. Sometimes from the base of the towers, sometimes from the old play barn. I'd blink and he'd be gone. I didn't tell anyone until it started affecting my sleep. That's when I confided in Joey, my friend from college and a bartender at the hideout. He joked about exes haunting people like unpaid loans, but I saw the concern flash in his eyes when I told him about the figure. One night, after a shift, he offered to drive past the park with me. "Let's just check. Prove to yourself it's nothing," he said. We parked near the far end, the one with fewer streetlights. The towers loomed like relics from another world, their metal husks catching the dim glow from downtown. And then we saw him. Or something. It wasn't Nathan. Not really. It was his frame, his stillness. But the way it stood, it was wrong. Its posture was too perfect. Head tilted slightly, like listening. Arms limp but not relaxed. And though it faced us directly, I couldn't make out a face. Just a silhouette, darker than the shadows around it. I wanted to run, but Joey stepped forward. "Hey!" he shouted. No movement, just wind through the grass. He walked closer, pulling out his phone to record. But the moment he lifted the camera, the figure vanished. Not walked away, vanished, like someone had erased it with one swipe of a brush. Joey turned to me, pale, breathing hard. "Okay, maybe you're not crazy. That night I didn't sleep. Not from fear, but from questions. What if it wasn't just Nathan's memory haunting me? What if I'd invited this thing by letting him live in my head too long? Grief doesn't only come from death. Sometimes the grief of losing yourself in someone can open doors to things you never meant to summon." A week later, I went back, alone. I sat near the edge of the water at sunset, waiting. I didn't bring my phone, I didn't bring Joey, just myself and the quiet throb in my chest. And he came. Same stillness, same posture, but this time he was closer, no more than 50 feet. I didn't move, just stared. The longer I looked, the more I realized something devastating. It wasn't Nathan. It had never been Nathan. It was everything he left behind. The fear, the guilt, the version of me that learned to walk on eggshells and call it love. I whispered, barely louder than the wind, "I'm not yours anymore." The figure flickered, literally, like a glitch in a video. Then it was gone. I haven't seen it since, but I still avoid gasworks. Not because I'm scared of seeing him again, but because I know what it took to make him leave. I had to face the version of myself that still clung to a love soaked in silence and control, and let her go. If you've ever been in a relationship where you forgot how to breathe without permission, where your joy was rationed and your fear became normal, I hope you know this. You deserve to leave. You deserve to be unreachable. And healing may look like a haunting at first, but it's just your mind learning how to walk free again. Please take care of your heart. If you're watching this and something about it feels familiar, you're not alone. And you don't have to wait for the ghost to show up to know it's time to go. If stories like this speak to something inside you, maybe stick around. There's more to uncover. And sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we live through and survive. Sometimes the silence doesn't follow you, it waits for you to return. To a place where love once bloomed, or died, or twisted quietly into something else. The next story takes us to Arkansas, where an old hotel holds not only history, but voices that refuse to disconnect. Story 2. Dead Line at the Crescent. The Crescent Hotel markets itself as America's most haunted hotel. But when I booked a weekend getaway there, ghosts were the last thing on my mind. I wasn't seeking scares or supernatural thrills. I was seeking closure. I had just ended a long, spiraling relationship with Melanie, a woman I had spent 3 chaotic years loving and slowly losing myself to. We had broken up in silence after months of screaming. I needed a place where the air didn't reek of her perfume, where the walls didn't remember our fights. The Crescent, with its quiet halls and historic chill, felt like the perfect place to vanish into neutrality. My room was on the 3rd floor. The windows were warped, the furniture older than my grandfather, and the bed let out a wooden sigh every time I sat on it. It was exactly what I needed, somewhere old, distant, and emotionally sterile. I turned off my phone for the first time in months. No texts, no calls, just me and the quiet. That lasted less than a day. At 2:09 a.m., the landline in the room rang. I stared at it from bed, blinking in the dark, confused. Who even used landlines anymore? I picked it up, expecting static or maybe a misdialed front desk. But I heard breathing. Long, uneven, almost panicked. Then a voice, low and cracked, whispered, "I miss how your voice sounded when you lied." I froze. The receiver burned against my ear. Before I could say anything, the line went dead. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had the wrong room. Maybe a guest had too much wine and dialed the number they shouldn't have. But that voice, it wasn't just familiar, it was precise. It had the venom Melanie used when she was half crying and half threatening to break something. I turned my cell phone back on in the morning. No missed calls, no texts. I checked every account, no new messages, but something was off. My email showed a draft, unsent, written at 2:10 a.m. I didn't remember typing it. It read, "You never really left. You're still in the walls." I told the front desk about the call. The woman behind the counter, Donna, a stout lady with silver hair and a tight expression, didn't flinch. "Room 327? She asked. I nodded. "That phone hasn't worked in over 10 years, she said. "We keep it for aesthetics." I didn't have a response to that. That night, I tried not to fall asleep. I sat on the floor by the window, listening to the quiet creaks of the old hotel. Around midnight, I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate. I went up to the 4th floor to check, but it was empty. Every door closed, every light off. The next night, it escalated. The phone rang again, same time. I didn't pick up, I unplugged it. At exactly 2:09, my cell phone lit up instead. Unknown caller. I declined. It rang again, and again, until I turned the whole thing off and threw it in the drawer. Then came the knocks. At first, they were soft. 1, 2, 3, spaced out like breathing. Then louder, faster, not from the door, but from the wall behind the bed. I pressed my ear to it and heard sobbing. Low, guttural, as if someone were trapped inside, clawing at the plaster. I left the room at dawn. I didn't check out, I just walked out and didn't look back. But that night, in a motel 50 miles away, my phone rang again. It was 2:09 a.m. I didn't answer. The next morning, I got a call from my friend Jesse, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. He asked if I was okay. "I got this weird voicemail from you," he said. "It's like static and crying." But it sounded like a woman. I checked my phone. No voicemail sent. Nothing in my call log. But more than 20 outgoing calls were recorded at 2:09 a.m. All to people I hadn't contacted in months. All from a phone that was off. I tried deleting everything. Factory reset. New number. But the calls didn't stop. And worse, my friends started sending screenshots. Posts that looked like they were from me, but they weren't. Messages like, "Do you remember what you did to me?" And he never let me go, so I stayed in the wires. I started to wonder, what if Melanie never left? Not metaphorically, not emotionally, but literally. What if the end of us didn't sever something but opened it? The last time I saw her, she had screamed something I hadn't understood until now. "You made me disappear," she'd said, her voice shaking. "So I'll do the same to you." Maybe some people love so violently, they leave behind more than memories. Maybe they linger in the frequencies, the silence between rings. And maybe we carry them with us whether we want to or not. If you're reading this and you're in a relationship where love feels like a threat, get out. Don't wait until their voice follows you into the dark. And don't romanticize the intensity. Obsession isn't affection. Possession isn't passion. Sometimes the silence after you leave is the loudest part. Please take care of your peace. And if this story feels familiar in a way you can't explain, it might be time to turn off the phone. And hey, if these kinds of stories speak to something inside you, stick around. You might find you're not the only one haunted. Even after the calls stop, something lingers. A sound, a presence, or maybe just a question left unanswered. But not all ghosts live in voicemails. Some wander through forgotten cemeteries, slipping through dreams like smoke, reminding us that not everything buried stays gone. Our next stop, Chicago. Story 3. The Forgotten Voice at Bachelor's Grove. There's something about abandoned cemeteries that makes the air feel heavier. Maybe it's the overgrown weeds tangling around half-sunken gravestones, or the crooked rusted gates that creak in the wind like they're trying to remember how to stay closed. Or maybe it's the way silence stretches longer in a place that holds names no one says aloud anymore. That was the kind of silence I met Daniel in. We started dating during our final year of college in Chicago. He was quiet in a charming way, the kind of guy who didn't talk much but always noticed things others missed, like how I flinched when car doors slammed, or how I never turned my back to an open door. At first, I mistook his attention for tenderness. It felt good to be seen until it felt like being watched, until it felt like being cornered. The relationship unraveled slowly. He questioned everything. Where I went, who I texted, why I looked tired, why I didn't smile at his jokes. His tone never rose, but there was always this pressure, like a hand around my neck that never squeezed, but never let go either. When I tried to leave, he cried, the kind of sobbing that made me feel like I was abandoning someone broken. So I stayed longer than I should have. Too long. I finally ended it after he showed up uninvited at my night class and waited in the parking lot until I came out, just standing in the dark, his arms crossed, his eyes empty. I didn't scream. I just turned and walked away. That was the last time we spoke. A few months later, he moved out of the city, and I thought that was the end of our story. But grief has a strange echo, and sometimes voices we forget how to hear find new ways to speak. It began with dreams. I'd see Daniel standing at the edge of a cemetery I didn't recognize. He never moved, just stared. The background always looked like something pulled from a decaying photo. Trees too still, sky too gray. His mouth would move, but I couldn't hear the words. I'd wake up with tears dried on my cheeks and dirt under my nails. I told myself it was just stress, the brain reshuffling unresolved guilt. But then came the suggestion I never should have taken. My cousin Michael, a freelance photographer with a morbid taste for the macabre, asked me to join him on a shoot at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. "It's barely even a cemetery anymore," he said, half laughing. "More like a ghost park with good lighting." I hesitated, but something in me, the same part that lingered too long in a toxic relationship, said yes. We drove out on a cloudy Sunday morning. The path to the cemetery was more of a trail than a road, half swallowed by trees and time. The place was exactly as he described, eerie but not terrifying, unkempt, forgotten, and yet familiar. I felt something twist in my chest as we stepped through the gate. Michael wandered off with his camera, chasing angles and shadows. I stayed near a tilted gravestone with no name, just a date. 1913. I don't remember sitting down, but I do remember the voice. It came from behind me, soft and frayed like old paper. You said you'd never walk away from me. I turned, heart clenching. No one was there. The cemetery was empty. But I knew that voice. It wasn't exactly Daniel's, but it wore his shape. I stood, breathing too fast, trying to ground myself. That's when Michael came running from the woods, pale and shaking. He didn't say anything at first, just shoved his camera into my hands. "Tell me what you see," he whispered. On the screen was a photo of me sitting by the grave. Behind me stood a figure, tall, male, featureless, blurred but distinct in posture. My posture, except it wasn't me. I was in the frame too. We left immediately. That night, I dreamt again, but it wasn't a dream. I knew that. I was back in the cemetery, only this time I could hear the voice clearly. I waited, it said, longer than you think. I stayed in the quiet places. I stayed in your guild. When I woke up, I was holding Michael's camera. I had left it in his car. I haven't returned to Bachelor's Grove. I haven't spoken to Daniel. I don't even know if he's alive. But I do know this. Some people don't haunt places. They haunt decisions. They live in the what-ifs, in the times we chose to be quiet instead of safe. And if we're not careful, they find ways to make us listen. Looking back, I wish I hadn't confused silence with peace. I wish I hadn't rationalized emotional manipulation as misunderstood affection. It's easy to forgive someone who cries after hurting you, but it's much harder to forgive yourself for staying when you knew better. If you've ever felt like walking away made you the villain, let me say this: it didn't. Protecting your own mind, your own voice, isn't selfish. It's survival. And if you've heard a voice calling you back to something you barely escaped, don't listen. Some voices belong to graves you already buried. You don't owe anyone your ruin. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If any part of it feels like something you've lived, or are living, I hope this helps you choose yourself next time. And if these stories remind you that you're not alone in what you faced, I'd be honored if you stayed to hear the next one. We leave the graves behind, but the unease travels with us. Some roads are cursed, not because of what's on them, but because of what we carry while crossing. Clinton Road in New Jersey isn't just a shortcut. It's a place where farewells never fully take hold. Story 4. The Vanishing Hitchhiker of Clinton Road. There's a road in northern New Jersey that locals avoid after dark, not because of its twists and poor lighting, but because of the stories. Clinton Road winds through thick woods like a vein through a scar. People talk about ghost trucks, phantom headlights, even a bridge that grants cursed wishes. I never believed any of it. Roads are roads, haunted only by the weight of what we carry on them. That's what I thought until I met Layla. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue in Hackensack. She had that quiet charisma, the kind that didn't try to impress you, but made you want to stay in the room just to see what she'd say next. Our connection felt like a storm forming slowly, distant thunder building under clear skies. She liked horror movies, long night drives, and people who didn't talk too much. I fit the bill perfectly. For a while, it was easy, but things shifted the way they always do. Slowly, then all at once. She started showing up unannounced, waiting in her car outside my apartment without calling. If I didn't answer her text right away, she'd send paragraphs, some pleading, some accusing. She cried when I asked for space. She screamed when I didn't respond. When I finally ended it, she stood on my porch in the rain for an hour, not saying a word, just staring. I moved cities, changed my number, deleted social media. Months passed. I thought that was the end. Then came the night I took Clinton Road. It was a shortcut, technically. I was heading home from visiting family, trying to beat a storm rolling in from the northwest. The sky was low, swollen with clouds, and the road stretched ahead like a tunnel of black ribbon. Trees leaned in on both sides, their bare branches scraping at the night. I wasn't scared, just tired, until I saw her. A woman walking along the shoulder, long dark hair, clothes clinging wet to her skin. I slowed down, thinking maybe she'd had car trouble. As I got closer, she turned her head, and my stomach dropped. It was Layla. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded a little on wet pavement. I sat there, engine idling, heart pounding. She didn't move, just stood there, watching me like she was waiting for something. I couldn't breathe. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year, and yet here she was, exactly the same. Same clothes from that night on my porch. Same expression, blank and unreadable. I opened the door, took one step out, and she vanished. Not walked away, not ran. Vanished, like she had been made of smoke. I drove the rest of the way with white knuckles and shallow breath. I didn't stop until I reached a diner just outside town. I must have looked half dead because the waitress asked if I needed an ambulance. I told her I was fine, just tired, just a weird night. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name and handwriting I hadn't seen in almost a year. Inside was a single photo. Me, standing on Clinton Road, next to my car, taken from the woods. Behind me, just barely visible in the tree line, was her. I went to the police. They took a report, but I could tell they didn't believe me. "Probably someone messing with you," the officer said. "Urban legend stuff. That road's full of it." I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Sometimes on the road, sometimes in my apartment. Once, reflected in the mirror when I turned to rinse my face. I started hearing things. My name whispered behind closed doors, knocks on the window when no one was outside. I checked security cams. Nothing ever showed. I called my old friend Marcus, someone who knew both of us back then. He was the one who told me the worst part. Layla had died. Not long after our breakup, she'd been found off a trail near Clinton Reservoir. Exposure. Alone. No foul play, they said. No suicide note. Just cold and silence. The storm had come early that night. She never made it back to her car. He asked if I'd heard. I told him I hadn't. I didn't know what else to say. That night, I drove to Clinton Road again. Not to chase her, to face something. Myself, maybe. The guilt I'd pretended not to feel. I parked where I'd seen her before, got out, waited. The woods were still. No wind, no animals. Just a heavy, unnatural quiet. And then I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned, but no one was there. Only darkness, stretching between the trees like a wound that never healed. I whispered her name, not out of love, out of something closer to apology. The air changed, warmer somehow, and then I felt it, fingers brushing my arm. Light, barely there. I didn't run. I just stood still, letting the moment pass through me. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was grief taking shape. But I never saw her again after that. Some roads don't just take you places. They bring things back with you. Echoes, memories, guilt you thought you buried. I still avoid Clinton Road, not because I'm afraid she'll appear, but because I'm afraid of how much I wanted her to. If you've ever left someone who didn't know how to let go, if you carry the weight of that goodbye, I hope you know this. Compassion doesn't mean staying. Walking away doesn't make you cruel, it makes you human. And if a voice from your past keeps trying to find you in strange places, ask yourself if it's them, or the part of you that still thinks you could have fixed it. Thank you for driving through this story with me. And if you've ever met your own ghost on a dark road, literal or not, you're not alone. Stick around. Sometimes the stories that haunt us are the ones we need to hear the most. Not every haunting needs headlights or highways. Sometimes it waits in places where stories were never meant to be told, where history is locked behind rust and stone. Eastern State doesn't ask questions, it just watches. And for some, that's more than enough to unravel everything. Story 5. Empty Frames at Eastern State. Some places hold on to the past so tightly, they leave no room for the present. Eastern State Penitentiary is one of those places. Cold stone walls that echo with silence too deliberate to be accidental. Narrow hallways that bend like a memory, trying to forget itself. I never had any interest in visiting it. Not until Aaron, my ex, decided to work there as a part-time tour guide. Not until the ghost tour he invited me to became our final shared memory. Aaron had a thing for abandoned places. He said they made him feel alive, like walking among the ruins of someone else's sorrow gave him permission to leave his own behind. We were together for 2 years, most of which felt like an exercise in swallowing words I knew would cause arguments. He wasn't cruel, just calculated. He knew how to apologize without ever meaning it, how to hold my hand while making me feel invisible. When we split, he said it was mutual, but only one of us cried. A year later, I saw his name tagged in a photo on Instagram, standing in front of cell block 14 at Eastern State, smiling with that same disarming charm he used to get free drinks and second chances. I should have scrolled past. But something in me wanted to see him again, just once, in a place where everything was broken by design. I signed up for the tour anonymously. It was in October, during their Halloween Nights program, when the prison became part haunted house, part living museum. The crowd was thick with costume staff and overly enthusiastic thrill seekers. I kept my hood up, kept my distance. Aaron didn't notice me, or maybe he did and chose not to react. He led our group with practiced ease, reciting history like a script he'd memorized just well enough to sound natural. His voice bounced off the stone like it belonged there. About halfway through, he brought us into a long, narrow hallway, lined with empty cells. This section used to house inmates in complete isolation, he said. No sound, no sunlight, just themselves and the walls. He smiled slightly. Some say if you stand still long enough, you can still hear them whispering. People laughed nervously, but I wasn't looking at him. I was looking past him, into one of the cells, where I thought I saw someone standing. Just a shape, no face, gone when I blinked. I told myself it was part of the performance. After the tour, I slipped away from the crowd and wandered off the marked path. The deeper I went into the prison, the quieter it became. The air shifted, heavier, colder, like walking underwater. I passed rows of decaying cell doors, each with a small square opening, like the frames of portraits where the subjects had stepped out. Then I found the camera. It was old, the kind used in early surveillance, perched above a corridor sealed with rusted gates. There shouldn't have been power, but a red light blinked steadily. Next to it, an old CRT monitor buzzed to life. Static, then an image. I saw myself, standing exactly where I was, but alone in a completely different hallway. And next to me, another figure. Tall, motionless, familiar. Aaron. Only. He looked wrong. He stood too straight, too still. His face lacked detail, like it had been erased, but his hand was on my shoulder. I turned around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing there, just stone and dust and silence. I ran. back through the corridors, through echoes that didn't belong to my footsteps. I stopped only when I reached the front gates, chest heaving, eyes wild. A security guard spotted me and asked if I was okay. I nodded, muttered something about getting separated from the group. He didn't press. That night, I dreamed of the hallway again. Only this time, I wasn't alone. I stood frozen, while frame after frame flickered past, each one showing a version of me with Aaron by my side. Smiling, crying, fighting, leaving. Each frame different, but each ending the same, with me looking straight into the camera as if I knew I was being watched. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. Me, from the tour, standing alone in the hallway. No one else around, but in the background, through the window of a cell, a blurry figure watched me. Same height, same posture, no face. I deleted the message, changed my number, threw away the phone, but it didn't end. Emails from addresses I didn't recognize. Subject lines like, "Do you remember this hallway?" And you left before I could explain. One email simply said, "The frames remember." I went back to Eastern State once, during the off-season, in daylight. I asked a staff member if the camera in the back corridor was part of the exhibit. She frowned. "We haven't had working cameras there in decades. Everything past cell block 10 is off limits. That area is completely dead." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just left. I've come to believe that the frames still exist. Not the literal ones, but the moments. The versions of a relationship frozen in time, looping in places where closure never came. Maybe we leave pieces of ourselves behind in the places where we pretended to be okay. Maybe those pieces grow restless when we try to move on. If you've ever left someone but still feel like they're standing right behind you in certain memories, you're not broken. You're healing. Slowly, painfully, honestly. And sometimes healing means walking away without needing the other person to understand why. Let those empty frames stay empty. You don't need to go back and fill them. Thank you for walking with me through this story. And if it made something stir inside you, if you've seen a version of yourself that you no longer want to be, just know this. You're not alone, and you don't have to look over your shoulder forever. Some ghosts only chase you until you stop running. And if the past can watch, can it also open doors? Doors we swore were never there? In the mountains of Colorado, one hotel holds such a door. A place where guilt wears your ex's face, and love becomes a hallway you should have never entered. Story 6. The Forbidden Door of Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel was never on my bucket list. I didn't grow up on horror movies or Stephen King novels. I didn't seek out haunted places or chase adrenaline the way some people chase clarity. I just needed a weekend away, somewhere high, cold, and far from Denver, far from Allison, and the unraveling that followed our split. The Stanley offered history, mountain air, and spotty cell service. That was enough. The receptionist gave me a key with a small warning smile. Room 325. Don't mind the creaks. She's an old building. The kind of line you assume they give every tourist hoping for a thrill. I didn't ask for a different room. I didn't want to look like I cared. The room was small, with antique furnishings and lace curtains that did little to block the afternoon sun. It smelled of cedar and something fainter, like forgotten perfume. I unpacked, showered, and took a short nap, lulled by the quiet. That first night, nothing happened. No footsteps in the hallway, no whispering vents, just the hum of old pipes and the weight of exhaustion. The second night, I noticed the door. Not the main door, not the bathroom. A third one, narrower, set oddly between the closet and the writing desk. It had no handle, just an old brass keyhole and chipped white paint. I was was certain it hadn't been there the night before. I would have noticed. I would have asked. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Just silence so dense it felt like it was listening back. At the front desk the next morning, I casually asked about the extra door. The woman, a different one than when I checked in, frowned. There shouldn't be a third door in 325. Just the main and the bath. She pulled out a laminated map. 2 doors. Back in the room, it was still there. Same place. Same absence of logic. I didn't touch it. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper, more primal. Like I wasn't supposed to acknowledge it. Like it only existed because I had nowhere else to put my grief. I had ended things with Allison 2 months before. There was no scandal, no dramatic betrayal, just the slow death of mutual kindness. We stopped touching, stopped asking questions. She moved out with a single suitcase and didn't look back. That kind of silence does something to a person. It fills the spaces grief usually occupies with confusion. You start missing things you didn't even like. That night, I dreamed of her. Not Allison, but a version of her. Standing in the hallway, knocking softly on the forbidden door. When I tried to call out, my voice didn't work. When I tried to move, my legs stayed frozen. She opened the door, stepped inside, and the dream ended. I woke to the sound of the floor creaking. It came from behind the door. I sat there, staring at it, heartbeat ticking in my throat. Then something changed. The room temperature dropped, not dramatically, but enough to notice. The perfume smell returned, stronger. I stood, reached out, and placed my palm against the wood. It was warm. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I found a note under my door. No envelope, typed, not handwritten, just one line. She wants to know why you locked her out. I checked with the front desk. No record of staff entering my room. No cameras in the hallway. No explanation. That afternoon, I spoke with Isaac, the night manager, an older man with an offbeat charm and eyes that had seen too much. I asked him directly, "Has anyone ever complained about a third door in room 325? He didn't answer immediately. Then he sighed. "Once," he said. "Years ago. A guest stayed there after a bad divorce. Claimed a door appeared where there wasn't one. Said his ex-wife kept knocking from the other side. We thought he had a breakdown. He checked out early and never really came back." "What do you mean?" "He died 2 months later. Hiking accident. Alone." That night I sat in the chair by the desk, facing the door. I didn't speak. I didn't pray. I just waited. Around 2 a.m., the knobless door creaked open. Only an inch, but enough. From inside came a faint sound. A woman's voice. It wasn't Allison's, but it knew things only she would say. Not words exactly, but emotional fingerprints. Memories bent into sound. A trip to Santa Fe. The taste of red wine she hated but drank anyway. The night we argued for hours, then fell asleep holding hands. The apology I never gave. I stood up, took one step forward, then I stopped. It wasn't her. It couldn't be her. She was alive, in Boulder, probably working at her cafe, probably dating someone who asked better questions. This wasn't about her. It was about me, about the guilt I hadn't faced. The part of me that wanted to believe silence was the same as peace. That walking away was clean. I whispered one word, no. The door shut on its own. In the morning, it was gone. Where it had been was just wallpaper, slightly off color, like a scar barely healed. I checked out early. I didn't ask for a refund. I didn't say goodbye to Isaac. I drove home in silence, the mountains watching in the rear view like old sentries. I've never returned to the Stanley, not because I'm afraid, but because I finally understood what the door was. It wasn't haunted. It was a test. A threshold between what I wanted to forget and what I needed to admit. Sometimes we don't leave relationships. We hide in the space between their ending and our healing. We wait for a knock on a door we never meant to build, hoping it will explain why we couldn't fix something already broken. If you've ever felt haunted by someone who's still alive, ask yourself what part of you still lives behind the door, and then walk away. You don't need to open it. Thank you for staying with me through this story. And if you've ever found yourself building doors where none should be, I hope you find the strength to leave them closed. If these stories speak to something inside you, maybe stick around. We're not alone in the things we carry. But even mountains can't hold all our ghosts. Some follow us into the wild, through waterlogged trails and sunless skies. The Everglades don't speak, they reflect. And if you see something watching you from the reeds, you may want to ask yourself what it remembers that you don't. Story 7. Eyes in the Everglades. There's a silence in the swamps that doesn't feel natural. It's not the absence of sound, but the weight of listening, like the trees themselves are waiting for something. The first time I set foot in the Florida Everglades, I felt that silence wrap around me like wet cloth. Thick, unshakable, and somehow personal. The trip was supposed to be a reset. I had just left a relationship that had unraveled slowly and quietly, like a thread pulled from a sweater you didn't realize was coming undone until it lay in a heap at your feet. Her name was Celine, and she made everything feel urgent. When we loved, it was frantic. When we argued, it was a battlefield. And when we broke up, it wasn't a conversation. It was a collision. I needed to be somewhere without cell service, without noise, without the constant feeling that someone was still standing just behind me. I booked a solo camping permit deep in the Everglades, far from the popular trails. The ranger who handed me the map gave me a strange look. "You going alone?" she asked. I nodded. "Make sure you're back before sundown, and don't follow any lights that don't belong to you." I thought it was a joke. I laughed. She didn't. I paddled out in a rented canoe, weaving through mangroves and narrow channels that felt more like arteries than waterways. I set up camp on a chicky platform, a small wooden structure built above the water, and watched the sun melt into the treetops. It was beautiful, isolated, perfect. That night, I woke to a splash. Not close, but deliberate. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. Water sloshed, then stillness, then the unmistakable creak of wood. Something, or someone, had stepped onto the platform. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. I flicked on my headlamp and scanned the area. No one, just mist curling off the water like smoke. I told myself it was the wood shifting, maybe a raccoon. I lay back down, pulse drumming in my throat, but I didn't sleep. The next day, I paddled deeper into the wetlands. My plan was to reach an observation tower marked on the map and spend the night near it. Around midday, I stopped to eat and check my gear. That's when I saw it. Carved into the wooden shaft of my paddle were 3 letters. CEL. I hadn't done it. I hadn't brought anything sharp enough to do it, and yet there it was, etched cleanly, precisely. Celine's name, the name I had tried to erase from my mind by coming here. I stared at it for too long, until a sudden gust of wind pushed ripples through the water and reminded me where I was. That night, I camped farther inland, off a dry patch of marsh. The ground was uneven, covered in reeds and decaying roots. I built a small fire, more for company than heat, and kept my flashlight within reach. The silence returned, that thick, listening kind. Then came the eyes, not glowing, not human, but there, dozens of them, reflected in the firelight from the edge of the clearing, just beyond where the grass grew tall. They didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. I stood up slowly. The fire cracked. I took a step back, and the eyes disappeared, all of them, gone in the time it takes to inhale. I didn't sleep at all that night. I packed up before dawn and started heading back toward the ranger station. But something felt off. The waterways had changed. The map no longer matched what I saw. Land where there should have been water. Water where there should have been trail. It was as if the swamp had rearranged itself. By mid-afternoon, I found a narrow opening between two mangroves and paddled through. That's when I saw her. Celine. Standing knee-deep in water, wearing the same dress she wore the day we ended things. Hair wet, eyes wide, expression unreadable. She didn't speak, just looked at me with a mix of sadness and accusation. I blinked. She was gone. No ripples, no movement, just water. I paddled faster. That night, I found a rickety dock half swallowed by moss and tied the canoe to it. I sat on the edge, exhausted, trying to understand what was happening. I pulled out my journal to write, something I hadn't done since before the breakup. The first page was blank. The second had writing on it. Not mine. You always disappear when it gets quiet. I dropped the book. The next morning, I followed the rising sun until I found a familiar trail. By noon, I stumbled back into the ranger station, sunburned and shaking. The ranger from before looked up from her desk and didn't seem surprised. "You followed the lights, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't answer. Back home, I tried to make sense of it. Was it guilt? Dehydration? Some elaborate stress-induced hallucination? Maybe. But something in me knows the Everglades didn't show me Celine. They showed me the parts of myself I tried to leave behind. The eyes weren't watching me. They were holding up a mirror. Some places don't just reflect the world. They reflect you. And if you're not ready to see yourself, they'll make sure you do. If you've ever left someone toxic, only to carry their shadow into places they've never been, you're not crazy. You're not cursed. You're just healing. And sometimes healing looks like being watched by something you can't explain. Don't chase the eyes. Don't carve names into paddles. Let the silence be silence. Thank you for coming this far with me. And if you've ever paddled through something dark, hoping to come out clean on the other side, keep going. Just don't forget who you are when no one's watching. There are places we climb to forget. High places, lonely ones. But sometimes, the higher you go, the closer you come to something you thought you left at ground level. In St. Augustine, there's a staircase, and at the top, something waits. Not to harm you, but to make sure you remember. Story 8. Staircase to Nowhere at St. Augustine. There's a staircase in the St. Augustine lighthouse that spirals up endlessly, past rusted railings and fading red brick, into a sky that seems farther than it should be. Most people climb it for the view, some for the thrill. But I went for something else. Closure, maybe. A chance to outclimb the memories that still whispered in the back of my mind like wind through broken windows. Her name was Elise. We met in college, fell into each other like matches into gasoline. Quick, consuming, unpredictable. She had a fire in her that made everything feel urgent, alive. For a while, that fire kept me warm, until it burned too close, and I realized I'd been standing in it for too long. Our relationship was beautiful in photos, toxic in silence. She didn't shout when things went wrong. She withdrew, made me beg for clarity, weaponized absence. I always felt like I was trying to prove I wasn't the villain in a story I never agreed to be part of. And then, one day, she left without a word. Vanished like she had never existed outside the frame of my phone screen. No goodbye, just emptiness. A year passed. I tried to move on, moved cities, dated half-heartedly, deleted old messages but never the photos. Grief is funny like that. It asks for rituals. And mine was visiting old places that meant something to us, as if retracing our steps might undo them. That's how I ended up at the lighthouse. It was a cloudy afternoon in early spring. Tourists moved lazily through the museum, snapping photos of maritime relics and weathered journals. I paid for a self-guided ticket, nodding absently at the docent who warned, "Watch your step. The staircase can feel endless." The base of the tower was cooler than expected. The air smelled of salt, rust, and wet stone. I touched the railing. It was slick, as if recently rained on, though the sky outside had been dry. I began to climb. Each step echoed slightly, the sound bouncing off the walls in irregular patterns. Halfway up, I stopped to rest. That's when I noticed the photos. They weren't part of the exhibit, just snapshots pinned to the wall with rusted nails. Black and white, blurred, but unmistakably a me. Sitting on a bench, walking along the beach, staring out a window. All recent, all impossible. I kept climbing. The air grew thinner the higher I went. The windows became fewer, the light dimmer. I lost track of time. The staircase curled above like a serpent, and for a moment I wondered if it ever truly ended. Then I saw her, Elise, just ahead of me on the landing, wearing the same hoodie she used to steal from my closet. Her hair longer, damp as if she'd been caught in rain I hadn't felt. She turned to look at me, but her face was wrong. Not distorted, just blank. Like someone had smoothed out the details with an eraser. She stepped through the next doorway. I followed. The landing opened into a room I didn't remember from any brochure. Windowless, circular. In the center stood another staircase, narrower, older, made of dark wood and missing several steps. It rose into nothing. No ceiling, just darkness. A single photo rested at the base. Elise and I, our last picture together. One she'd sworn never existed. Torn down the middle, then taped back together. I reached for it. A whisper echoed from above. My name, drawn out like a memory I hadn't invited. I looked up and saw the eyes. Dozens of them. Not physical, not glowing, but there. Watching from the dark like regrets you thought had died. I stumbled back. The photo fell, shattered like glass, though it had never been made of it. Then the steps began to creak, not under me, but above, descending. I turned and ran, down the stairs, through the spiral, past walls that now dripped with water and shadows that moved without light. My chest burned. My legs screamed, but I didn't stop. I burst into the museum lobby, gasping for air. Tourists looked up, startled. The docent raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" I nodded, though my hands trembled. Outside, the sky was clear, blue, unremarkable. I never went back. That night, I received an email. No subject, no sender. Just one line in the body. Some love stories aren't meant to end, just to echo. Attached was a photo. Me, on the staircase. Elise behind me. Only, I was alone the whole time. I deleted the message, but it came back. Again and again. Different photos. Always her. Always that blank face. I changed emails, switched phones, burned the hoodie she left behind. Nothing helped. I spoke to a historian who worked at the lighthouse. He said no room existed above the final landing. No second staircase, no hidden exhibit, just the tower and the light. When I asked about strange occurrences, he paused. "People say the tower reflects things," he said. "Not light, not sound, memory. It turns your past into space. Maybe that's what I climbed that day. Not a staircase, but a timeline. A spiral through every version of us I hadn't let die. If you've ever tried to revisit something you barely escaped, hoping this time it would feel different, don't. Some doors are heavy for a reason. Some steps don't lead anywhere but back into what broke you. And if the person you loved shows up without a face, it might be because you stopped seeing them long before they left. Thank you for staying through this last story. If something in it stirred a memory you've tried to bury, know this. You are not your echoes. You are not your unfinished staircases. You are here, and you have already climbed higher than you think. And now, the stories have been told. 8 shadows, 8 echoes, 8 moments where love became something else, something colder, something uninvited. But before we say goodbye, take a breath, and remember, what haunts us most isn't what we've escaped, it's what we still carry in silence. If you made it this far, thank you. I know these stories weren't easy. They weren't filled with jump scares or over-the-top horror. They were quiet, unsettling, familiar in ways we don't always like to admit, because love, when it turns, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it fades into something colder, something that lingers in our habits, our dreams, our silence. And when the doors finally close, the ones who hurt us don't always stay behind them. Sometimes we carry them in how we flinch at kindness, how we question joy, how we mistake peace for emptiness. Each of these 8 stories came from a place of loss, of reflection, of truth. Not all of them ended in blood or tragedy. Some ended in realization, some in confrontation, some simply stopped, like the relationships they mirrored, without a clean goodbye. And maybe that's what makes them stick. Not the horror itself, but the residue it leaves behind. If you saw pieces of yourself in these stories, I hope you felt less alone. If they unsettled you, maybe it's because they held a mirror, not just a monster. And if they made you remember someone, ask yourself whether that memory still has power over you, or if you're finally ready to let it go. Please take care of your heart. Set boundaries like gates, not prisons. And know that healing is not forgetting, it's remembering differently. If you'd like to stay with us for more stories like these, ones that unsettle, unravel, and maybe even offer some release, you're welcome here. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and don't ignore the knock that sounds like a voice you used to love.